I'm sitting in this imposing meeting room, the air conditioning humming, but I feel a burning heat in my chest. My hands are sweating on the polished mahogany table, a piece of furniture worth more than my car. Here, in the Del Valle mansion. Every object screams opulence, an opulence I never quite felt was mine. Just a few days ago, Christmas passed without me. The traditional family dinner, the most important event of the year for the Del Valles, happened without an invitation for the adopted daughter. I found out through my brother's social media, photos of forced smiles and a Christmas tree that looked like an advertisement. The pain of exclusion still stings, but what I hold in my hands now is much worse. A thick envelope, no return address. That arrived by courier this morning. Inside, there was no apology, no explanation, but a cold, formal sheet of paper. Invoice for upbringing expenses, Camila Del Valle. My eyes scanned the bold figure, $10,000 US. $10,000 for being the adopted daughter, for the years I lived under their roof, for the food I ate, for the clothes I wore. Every line of the invoice was a stab. Primary and secondary education, $3,000. Food and clothing, annual average $5,000. Medical and recreational expenses, $2,000. It was a cruel, dehumanizing list that reduced my existence to a series of accounting transactions. How could they do something like this? After 28 years of calling me daughter, of sharing a last name, of pretending to be a family, they send me a bill? My heart pounded with a mix of rage and a deep sadness that threatened to overwhelm me. The meeting room door opened, and my adoptive parents, Mr. and Mrs. Del Valle, entered, followed by my brother, Ricardo. Mr. Del Valle, in his impeccable suit and impassive face, took his seat at the head of the table, as if this were a board meeting. Mrs. Del Valle, always elegant and distant, sat beside him, her cold eyes showing no trace of warmth. Ricardo, my brother, slumped into his chair with a condescending smile, as if he already knew the outcome of this farce and no one said a word at first. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken expectations and accumulated resentments. I looked at each of them, searching for a shred of humanity, a sign that this was a bad joke, but there was no joke in their eyes. Only an iron determination, the same they used in their businesses. It was clear they had planned this meticulously, leaving no room for emotion or compassion. Mr. Del Valle broke the silence, his voice deep and authoritative. Camila, thank you for coming. I imagine you've already reviewed the document we sent you. His tone was so formal, so devoid of affection, that it made me feel like just another employee in their vast corporation. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. Yes, I've seen it. And I can't believe it. An invoice? Why? My voice trembled slightly, betraying the fury boiling inside me. Mrs. Del Valle adjusted her designer glasses. Camila, we've always been transparent with costs. Adoption, though an act of charity, involves financial responsibilities. We believe it's time for you to assume your part. Her words were like knives wrapped in silk. Ricardo chuckled. Yeah, Cammy. You're an adult woman now, aren't you? It's time you understood how the real world works. Nothing is free. His mockery ignited me even more. I felt my fists clench under the table. The humiliation was unbearable. It wasn't just the money, it was the way they were stripping me of any vestige of belonging, any illusion that I was ever truly part of this family. This wasn't a home, it was a business. And I, apparently, was a failed investment they were now collecting on. The meeting room, which before seemed only a symbol of power, now felt like a cage, and I was the prey. Mr. Del Valle nodded, approving his wife's and son's words. Exactly, Camila. We've always believed in individual responsibility. We've provided you with a comfortable life, a quality education, opportunities many only dream of. His voice was a rehearsed monologue. And in return, what? What have we received? Mrs. Del Valle added with a slight tone of reproach. Ricardo has always been a pillar in our businesses, a son who makes us proud. You, on the other hand, have chosen a path, less lucrative. Her disdainful gaze fell on my modest attire. Ricardo shrugged. Mom's right. You were always the dreamer, the one who didn't want to get her hands dirty with family business. While I was killing myself in college and at the office, you were with your artistic projects. The mockery was evident in his voice. Artistic projects were my career as a graphic designer, something I was always passionate about and which, though it didn't make me a millionaire, allowed me to live with dignity and independence. Their contempt for my work was constant. But that doesn't justify this invoice, I replied, my voice now firmer. You adopted me. That's supposed to be an act of love, of commitment. Not a commercial contract with an expiration date. Indignation gave me strength. Mr. Del Valle sighed, as if my naivety tired him. Camila, let's be realistic. The adoption was an agreement, not a fairy tale. We gave you a home when you had none, a chance at life. His tone was condescending. And now, at your age and with your independence, it's fair that you contribute to the expenses you generated. It's not charity, it's a matter of equity. Mrs. Del Valle added, crossing her arms, her posture rigid. Equity? You're charging me for my childhood? I couldn't believe the coldness of their words. It was as if they were talking about a financial asset, not a person. The meeting room, with its sterile atmosphere, amplified their detachment. Ricardo interjected, his voice softer, almost conciliatory, but with underlying malice. Look, Cammy, Dad and Mom are getting older. They need to secure their future. Businesses don't always go well. It's a help, you know? His attempt at manipulation was transparent. Help? For $10,000? And why didn't you invite me to Christmas dinner, then? Was that also on the bill? The question escaped my lips before I could stop it, loaded with all the accumulated pain. Mr. Del Valle's face twitched slightly. That's a separate matter, Camila. Christmas dinner is an event for the family's closest circle. And, frankly, your recent attitude hasn't been the most cooperative. His evasion was obvious. My attitude? Or the fact that I'm not who you want me to be? I challenged them, feeling a spark of rebellion grow within me. I had nothing left to lose. Mrs. Del Valle frowned. You were always a bit rebellious, Camila. You never quite fit into our circles. Ricardo, on the other hand, has always understood our expectations. Her comparison was a low blow. It hurt, of course it did, but it also gave me a strange clarity. I always knew it deep down, but this invoice and this exclusion made it undeniable. I was never truly part of their world. So this invoice is your way of telling me I'm no longer part of the family, isn't it? My voice was barely a whisper, but it resonated in the silence of the room. Mr. Del Valle cleared his throat. It's not that dramatic, Camila. It's simply a matter of responsibility. We expect payment within 30 days. The coldness of his ultimatum was overwhelming. My mind raced. I didn't have $10,000. My savings account barely covered a couple of months' rent. I was trapped, or so they wanted me to believe. Silence fell upon the room again, this time heavier, laden with the weight of the demand. My adoptive parents watched me, their faces impassive, awaiting my reaction, my surrender. Ricardo, for his part, allowed himself a small smirk of satisfaction. I don't have $10,000, I admitted, my voice almost inaudible. The shame of that confession, of my supposed financial incapacity, was a weapon they knew how to wield. Mr. Del Valle raised an eyebrow. Camila, you are a young and capable woman. You have a job. We are sure you can find a way. Perhaps a loan, or you could ask your friends for help. His tone was barely veiled mockery. Mrs. Del Valle added, with a false tone of concern. You always said you were independent. This is an excellent opportunity to prove it. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet, completely. Her words were sweet poison. Ricardo leaned forward. Or you could, I don't know, sell some of your artworks. Maybe they're worth more than you think. Or less. His laughter filled the space, making me feel smaller. The knot in my stomach tightened. The pressure was immense. They wanted to see me bend, see me beg, see me admit that without them, I was nothing. It was a test of power, a public humiliation. Designed to reassert their control. And what if I can't pay? I challenged them, though my heart pounded hard against my ribs. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go with this charade. Mr. Del Valle leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers. Well, Camila, like any debt, there will be consequences. We could pursue a legal solution, seize assets, though I don't think you have much of value. His voice was cold and calculated. Mrs. Del Valle added, with an almost compassionate tone that chilled me to the bone. Or, we could reach an agreement. Perhaps you could work for us, at the company. A lower position, of course, to pay off your debt. The idea of being their employee, their slave, turned my stomach. The IT was a trap. A way to tie me to them, to keep me under their thumb, to ensure I would never escape their influence. The meeting room had become a courtroom, and I was the accused. So this is why you didn't invite me to Christmas? To prepare me for this? So I wouldn't suspect anything? The question escaped, filled with resentment. Ricardo laughed again. Cammy, you're so dramatic. It was just dinner. Seriously, do you think everything revolves around you? There are more important things than a family dinner. His disdain was palpable, but I knew it wasn't just dinner. It was the symbol of my exclusion, the prelude to this humiliation. It was confirmation that, to them, I was a burden, not a daughter. You always made me feel like I didn't fit in, I said, my voice now lower, more reflective. But I never imagined you'd put a price on my existence. The pain was sharp. Mrs. Del Valle sighed. Camila, don't be melodramatic. We gave you everything. A home, food, clothes, education. What more did you want? For us to hand you the world on a silver platter? Her tone was exasperated. I wanted a family. I wanted love. I wanted to feel part of something, not an investment. The words came out with a force that surprised even myself. Mr. Valle gently tapped the table with a finger. Enough with the sentimentality, Camila. This is a business matter. The invoice is there. We await your response and your payment plan. His voice cut through the air like a knife. I remained silent, looking at them, feeling the weight of their contempt, but also a strange sense of lightness. The mask had fallen. The truth, however painful, was before me. And at that moment, an idea, a fleeting memory, began to form in my mind. As Mr. Del Valle awaited my response, my mind drifted to a distant, fragmented, yet persistent memory. A conversation I overheard as a child, in this very house, perhaps not in this room, but somewhere nearby. Whispering voices, words I didn't understand at the time, but which now resonated with new and chilling clarity. The agreement is clear, a male voice had said, not my adoptive father's. She is the only one. The inheritance is tied to her well-being. The voice was deep, authoritative, and I remembered it with a sense of childish fear. Mrs. Del Valle, in that memory, had replied with a tone of annoyance. But she's a child. Do we have to keep her until she's older? It's a considerable expense. Her complaint was unmistakable. I was very small, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, and I was hiding behind a curtain, playing hide-and-seek. I didn't understand an agreement, or inheritance, but the tension in their voices scared me. That memory, which I had always dismissed as a dream or a childish fantasy, now felt strangely real. What agreement could that be? What inheritance? They had never told me anything like it. The Del Valles always told me that my biological parents had died in an accident and that they, out of their great heart, had adopted me. A simple, tragic story that gave me an identity, but now, that story felt hollow, like a carefully constructed facade. The coldness with which they treated me today, the invoice, the Christmas exclusion, all fit with the idea that I was a burden. Not a beloved daughter. Mr. Del Valle interrupted my thoughts. Camila, are you listening? We need an answer. How do you plan to proceed with the invoice payment? His voice was impatient. I'm thinking, I replied, my voice now calmer, more controlled. The spark of a plan began to ignite within me. That memory, however vague, was a clue. Ricardo laughed. Thinking, that's new. Usually, you just complain or doodle. His contempt spurred me further to seek the truth. Who exactly were my biological parents? I asked, looking directly at Mr. Del Valle. The question caught them by surprise. Their faces tensed. Mrs. Del Valle was the first to recover. We've told you 1,000 times, Camila. An accident. Humble people. There's nothing more to know. Her tone was sharp, evasive. And they had no family? Friends? No one to take care of me? I insisted, feeling I was touching a raw nerve. Their discomfort was palpable. Mr. Del Valle cleared his throat again. They were people without many ties. That's why we brought you home. There was no one else. His answer was too quick, too rehearsed. And what about my birth surname? Do you remember it? I stared at them, looking for any sign of hesitation. They had always insisted my original surname was Garcia, a common name easy to forget. Mrs. Del Valle stiffened. Camila, what is all this about? We're talking about a debt, not your family tree. Focus on the present. Her voice was a warning, but I wasn't going to back down anymore. The memory of that deep voice, the word inheritance, the insistence on my well-being. There was something more, something they had carefully hidden for years. And this meeting room, this stage of my humiliation, would also be the place of their revelation. Ricardo, who until now had remained in the background, enjoying the spectacle of my discomfort, decided to intervene with a mocking smile. Cammy, don't you get tired of living in the past? Your parents gave you everything, and now you're looking for ghosts? His tone was one of superiority. It had always been like this with Ricardo. Since childhood, he was the real son, the heir. The one who understood the world of business and power. I was the addition, the one who was always a step behind, the one who never quite fit in. Ricardo, this is none of your business, I snapped, my gaze fixed on him. His complicity with my parents in this charade was what hurt me the most. He knew I didn't have that money, and yet, he reveled in my situation. Of course it's my business, he replied, shrugging. I'm the son, the one who's always been here, the one who's worked to support this family. You've just been a burden. Frankly. His cruelty hit me squarely. My adoptive parents did not intervene. In fact, Mr. Del Valle nodded slightly, as if approving his son's words. Mrs. Del Valle merely looked at me with that superior expression that had always driven me to despair. A burden? After everything I've tried? My voice cracked a little. I always sought their approval, always tried to please them, even if it was on my own terms. Ricardo laughed. Tried, yes. But you never achieved anything that truly made us proud. Your little drawings, your designs, is that a career? Please. His tone was dismissive. My career gives me independence, something you never wanted me to have, I retorted, feeling my anger turn into a cold determination. I no longer cared about their approval. Independence is expensive, Camila, Mr. Del Valle said, his voice grave. And, as you see, it comes at a price. A price we are now charging you. His gaze was steel. The meeting room, with its dark wood paneled walls and expensive paintings, felt increasingly oppressive. It was a perfect setting for their power game, and I, the puppet they tried to control. And what about morality? I asked, my voice echoing in the silence. Don't you find it immoral to charge a child for their upbringing? What kind of people do that? Mrs. Del Valle laughed disdainfully. Morality, Camila, is a luxury not everyone can afford. We have built an empire with hard work and difficult decisions, not with sentimentality. Her cynicism was overwhelming, Ricardo added, with a malicious smile. Besides, who says you're his daughter? Legally, yes, but emotionally. You were always different. You were always the other. His words were a low blow, designed to hurt. That word, other, resonated in my head. I had always felt it, that subtle difference, that invisible barrier that separated me from them. Now, they had verbalized it, made it tangible, but instead of hurting me, their words ignited a flame. If I was the other, if I wasn't part of their world, then I didn't have to follow their rules. I had to find my own path, my own truth. Perhaps you're right, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Perhaps I was always this other. But that doesn't mean I don't have rights. Or that I don't have my own story. I looked at each of them, a new resolve shining in my eyes. Mr. Del Valle frowned, sensing a shift in my attitude. Camila, we're not here to discuss your identity. We're here to discuss the invoice. Do you have a payment plan or not? His voice was an ultimatum. I have a plan, I replied, my gaze firm. But first, I want you to answer one last question about my biological parents. A question that will make you reconsider everything. The air in the room became tense, charged with an unusual expectation. Mr. Del Valle looked at me with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Camila, we have already told you everything you need to know about your biological parents. There's nothing more to discuss. His tone was a warning, but I wouldn't back down. No, you haven't told me everything, I retorted, my voice resonating with new authority. I want to know the name of the notary's office that handled their inheritance. The inheritance that, as I heard as a child, was tied to my well-being. The word inheritance seemed to strike them like lightning. Why adoptive parents' faces turned pale. Ricardo, who until then had been smiling, was left with his mouth open. The silence in the meeting room became sepulchral, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. What are you talking about, Camila? Mrs. Del Valle managed to stammer, her voice barely a whisper. Her usual composure had completely vanished, revealing a fear I had never seen in them before. I'm talking about something I heard a long time ago, I explained, my gaze fixed on Mr. Del Valle. Something about an agreement, an inheritance, and my well-being. Why are you so nervous? I gave them a cold smile. Mr. Del Valle quickly composed himself, though with visible effort. Camila, you're delusional. There is no inheritance. Your parents had nothing. It's a childish fantasy. His voice was louder than normal, almost desperate. Fantasy? Or a secret you've guarded closely for years? I challenged them, feeling I was about to unearth something huge. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Ricardo intervened, his voice trembling. Cammy, you don't know what you're talking about. You're confusing things. You were always imaginative. His attempt to dismiss me was weak, full of nervousness. Imaginative? Or did I just remember something you wanted me to forget? The meeting room, which was once a symbol of their power, now felt like a stage where their facade began to crack. Mrs. Del Valle abruptly stood up from her chair. This is ridiculous. We're done with this conversation. Either you pay the invoice, or we'll take legal action. Her voice was sharp, desperate. No, we're not done, I said calmly. Because before I pay a single cent, I want to know the truth. The truth about my adoption, about my parents, and about that inheritance. My voice was firm, unwavering. Mr. Del Valle rubbed his temples, his face reflecting deep frustration. Camila, there is no inheritance. I swear to you. Your parents were simple people, without assets. His denial was vehement, but it sounded hollow. Then why the fear in your eyes? Why the haste to change the subject? Why did you never want to talk to me about my past? The questions came one after another, piercing their wall of lies. Ricardo stood up, his face flushed. Enough, Camila. You're making things up. You were always a manipulator. His accusation was a reflection of his own fear. Manipulator, me? Or those who sent me a bill for my existence? I confronted them, feeling an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. The meeting room, witness to their tyranny, would now be witness to their downfall. Del Valle sank into his chair, his gaze lost. Mrs. Del Valle sat down again, her hands trembling. A small glimmer of truth, a word, had been enough to destabilize their house of cards. And I was ready to tear it down completely. As the Del Valle family recovered from the shock of my question about the inheritance, I took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of victory. It wasn't a complete victory, but I had opened a breach. For years, I had felt that something didn't fit, a missing piece in the puzzle of my life. The coldness of their treatment, the subtle distance, the disdain for my life choices, all had fueled an unease. The Christmas invoice was the last straw. But also the catalyst that pushed me to act. I hadn't come to this meeting room unprepared. The night I received the invoice, anger and sadness transformed into cold determination. If they wanted to play business, so could I. I remembered that conversation from my childhood, the word inheritance, and decided to investigate. I didn't have much, just a common name, Garcia, and the vague notion of an accident. But in the digital age, information is power. I spent hours online, searching for accident records from 20-something years ago, cross-referencing data with common names, looking through local newspaper archives. It was a needle in a haystack. But something told me not to stop, and then, I found it. Not just any Garcia. A regional newspaper article, from 22 years ago, about a tragic car accident on a rural highway. The victims' names, Ana and Miguel Robles, not Garcia. Robles. That was the first hint of their deception. The article mentioned that the couple owned a small but prosperous agricultural business in the state of Arizona, and that they left behind a young daughter, the agricultural business. That was the second clue. The Del Valles were real estate magnates, but they always had diversified investments. Could there be a connection? I kept investigating, digging deeper into public records. And what I found chilled me to the bone. A will. The will of Ana and Miguel Robles. And in it, a specific clause, their entire fortune, which was not insignificant for a medium-sized agricultural company, would be managed by a trust until their daughter, Camila Robles, turned 25. And, crucially, the trustees would be Mr. and Mrs. Del Valle, and there was more. A clause stipulating that if the daughter was not raised in a suitable environment or if her well-being was compromised, the funds would be donated to a charity. And the trustees would lose control. They didn't adopt me out of charity. They adopted me to control my inheritance, to ensure those funds weren't lost and, perhaps, to benefit in some way. The $10,000 invoice was a blatant attempt to justify their expenses before I discovered the truth. Mr. Del Valle, his face still pale, looked at me. Camila, what do you know? What are you implying? His voice was a whisper of fear. I know my parents weren't Garcia, I replied, my voice firm. I know their names were Ana and Miguel Robles. And I know they owned an agricultural business. In Arizona. The information hit the family like a wave. Mrs. Del Valle brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes filled with horror. Ricardo was speechless, his smug smile completely gone. The meeting room, once their fortress, was now the stage for their exposure. And I know you didn't adopt me out of love or charity, I continued, my voice rising in volume. You adopted me because you were the trustees of a trust. A trust that contained the inheritance from my real parents. The long-hidden truth was finally coming to light. Mr. Del Valle stood up abruptly, slamming the table. Lie. You're making all this up. It's slander. His voice resonated with fury, but it was the fury of a cornered man. Slander? Or the truth? You've hidden for 22 years for your own benefit? I challenged them, feeling the power of truth in my words. The meeting room, with its charged atmosphere, filled with the echo of their deception. Mr. Del Valle's shout filled the room. But his fury didn't intimidate me. On the contrary, it gave me more strength. I had waited for this moment, this confrontation, and I wasn't going to back down. It's not slander, Mr. Del Valle, I said calmly, pulling a folder from my bag. It's the truth. And I have the proof right here. The sound of paper rustling in the folder was the only noise in the tense room. Mrs. Del Valle's eyes fixed on the folder, filled with a mixture of terror and desperation. Ricardo had remained motionless, his face as white as paper. Here I have copies of the newspaper article about Ana and Miguel Robles' accident, I began, sliding a sheet across the table. Here is the registration of their agricultural business in Arizona. And here, most importantly, I pulled out a copy of the will. Here is the clause establishing the trust. A trust that was meant to ensure my well-being until I turned 25. And you, the Del Valles, were the trustees. My voice was clear and resonant. Mr. Del Valle tried to grab the copy, but I pulled it back. No, don't touch it. This is my evidence. And I will present it wherever necessary. His hand remained in the air, trembling. A trust? What trust? Ricardo stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Disbelief and fear mixed on his face. My biological parents' trust, Ricardo, I explained, looking him directly in the eyes. A trust that, according to the will, you were supposed to manage for my benefit. A trust that, if not handled properly, would go to a charity. Mrs. Del Valle collapsed into her chair, covering her face with her hands. The foundations of their lie were crumbling before their eyes. The meeting room, witness to their manipulations, was now the stage for their downfall. So, the $10,000 invoice, I continued, my voice loaded with irony, wasn't to cover upbringing expenses. It was a desperate attempt to justify the diversion of funds from the trust, wasn't it? An attempt to make it seem like you had invested in me, when in reality, you were just plundering what was mine. Mr. Del Valle stood up again, but this time, his posture was one of defeat. Camila, this is a misunderstanding. We always looked out for you. The trust funds were for major expenses, not for day-to-day living. His excuse was pathetic. Major expenses? Like the purchase of your new summer house in Miami last year? Or the investment in Ricardo's new project? I challenged them, my eyes fixed on theirs. I had investigated their financial movements too, their faces contorted. I had hit the mark. The invoice was a smokescreen, an attempt to cover their tracks. Before I reached the age when the trust would be released in my name. You didn't adopt me out of love. You adopted me for money. For my money, I asserted, the truth resonating in every word. The meeting room, with its echo, amplified the raw reality. Ricardo tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The magnitude of the deception, the hypocrisy of his parents, had left him speechless. He too had been part of this charade, indirectly benefiting from my fortune. And the exclusion from Christmas dinner, I concluded, my voice now filled with deep sadness, didn't matter. Because the family that truly matters, the one that gave me my true legacy, isn't here. And you never were. Mr. and Mrs. Del Valle remained silent, defeated. The meeting room, with its charged atmosphere, became a monument to their downfall. And I, Camila Robles, was finally free. The silence that followed my declaration in the meeting room was deafening, broken only by Mrs. Del Valle's muffled sobs. My words had struck with the force of a hammer, tearing down the facade of virtue and charity they had maintained for decades. Mr. Del Valle, once so imposing, now seemed shrunken, his gaze lost. Ricardo, for his part, recovered from the initial shock with an explosion of anger. This is insane, Camila. You're making everything up. There's no trust. My parents would never do anything like that. His voice was a desperate cry to maintain the lie. Insane? Or afraid of the truth, Ricardo? I confronted him, my voice calm. And firm. I have the documents. I have the proof. Do you think I'd risk coming here without them? My gaze didn't waver from his. Mr. Del Valle raised his head, his eyes bloodshot. Camila, please. We can talk about this. We can reach an agreement. You don't have to make this public. His tone was pleading, something I had never heard from him. An agreement? Now that you know I discovered your secret? I laughed, a bitter, joyless laugh. The $10,000 invoice was your agreement, wasn't it? A way to get rid of me and keep what's mine. Mrs. Del Valle lifted her head, her eyes swollen with tears. Camila, please. Think of the family. The scandal. This would ruin everything we've built. Her voice was a lament. The family? What family? I challenged them. The family that charged me for my existence, that excluded me from Christmas, that lied to me about my past and stole my inheritance. Is that the family I should protect? My indignation was palpable. Mr. Del Valle stood up, his voice now more controlled, but with a hint of threat. Camila, you don't know who you're dealing with. We have lawyers, influence. We can make this disappear. His attempt at intimidation was evident. And I have the truth, I replied, holding up the folder. And the truth, Mr. Del Valle, is much more powerful than your lawyers and your influence. Especially when it comes to a trust and embezzlement of funds. Ricardo approached the table, his face contorted with rage. Don't you dare, Camila. You can't do this. You'll ruin our lives. His desperation was real, but it wasn't my problem. You ruined mine, Ricardo, I reminded him. Or at least, you tried to. You made me believe I was worthless, a burden, while you benefited from what my real parents left me. Mrs. Del Valle shuffled towards me, trying to take my hand. Camila, daughter, please. We always loved you. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding. We can compensate you. Her sudden affection was repulsive. Compensate me? With what? With more lies? With more crumbs of what's already mine? I pulled my hand away. The meeting room, which had been the stage of their power, was now that of their desperation. Mr. Del Valle slumped back into his chair, his gaze fixed on the folder. He knew he was cornered. The revelation of the trust, and my knowledge of their financial movements, had left him no escape. What do you want, Camila? He asked, his voice barely a whisper of defeat. The question was not out of curiosity, but out of surrender. I want the truth. I want what's mine. And I want you to stop pretending you're a family to me, I replied. My voice firm and clear. The meeting room, which had been my prison, was now my courtroom. And I, the judge. Mr. Del Valle's question, what do you want, Camila? Echoed in the meeting room like a whisper of his defeat. My adoptive parents, once so self-assured, were now crumbling before my eyes. Ricardo, who had been so cruel, remained silent, his face a mask of panic. I want justice to be served. I replied, my voice filled with an authority I had never felt before. I want the truth about the trust to be acknowledged. And I want what is rightfully mine. Mr. Del Valle looked up, his eyes pleading. Camila, please, we can settle this privately. We don't need to involve anyone else. Think of the family's reputation. His last card was public shame. Reputation? The same reputation that allows you to send invoices to your adopted children and steal their inheritance? I laughed, a cold, joyless laugh. Your reputation is already tainted, Mr. Del Valle. And the truth always comes out. Mrs. Del Valle, her voice choked with tears, tried one last emotional play. Camila, don't do this to us. We gave you a home. We gave you a name. We gave you a life. Her voice was a lament, but it no longer moved me. You gave me a life of lies, I retorted, my voice rising in volume. You made me feel like a burden, a stranger, while you benefited from the fortune my real parents left me. Is that giving a life? Ricardo, finally, found his voice, though it was trembling. But the money, is it that much? Why did they never mention it? His ignorance, or his denial, was surprising. My parents, Ana and Miguel Robles, owned an agricultural business that, though not an empire like yours, was very prosperous, I explained, looking at Ricardo. And yes, the inheritance was considerable. Enough to secure my future, and for you to live comfortably at my expense, without having to touch your own. Mr. Del Valle rubbed his face with his hands, his posture of defeat complete. We did it. For your good, Camila. To protect you. Money in the hands of a child. His excuse was weak, transparent. Protect? Or control? Or simply steal? I interrupted them, leaving no room for their manipulations. The will's clause was clear, the funds were for my well-being. And you used them for your own benefit. Mrs. Del Valle sobbed. But the expenses? The house, the food, the education. All of that cost. The invoice was just a part. Her desperation was palpable. The invoice is a farce, I asserted. An attempt to cover your tracks. And the truth is that you have been living off my inheritance for years, while making me feel like I owed you everything. Mr. Del Valle looked up, his gaze empty. So, what will you do, Camila? His voice was a whisper of surrender. What I should have done a long time ago, I replied, my voice clear and resonant. Expose the truth. Reclaim what is mine. And free myself from this family. Charade. The meeting room, which had been the stage of their power and my humiliation, now felt like a place of liberation. The truth had been revealed, and with it, my own strength. Ricardo stared at his parents, a mixture of anger and disappointment. On his face, the image of the perfect family had completely crumbled. And as for the Christmas dinner, I added, my voice now softer, but with a pang of pain, it doesn't matter. Because the family that truly matters, the one that gave me my true legacy, isn't here. And you never were. Mr. and Mrs. Del Valle remained silent, defeated. The meeting room, with its charged atmosphere, filled with the echo of my truth, a truth that had stripped them of everything. And I, Camila Robles, was finally free. The silence that followed my declaration was different. It was no longer a silence of tension or waiting, but one of defeat for them and victory for me. My adoptive parents, the Del Valles, seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. Ricardo, my brother, remained aloof, processing the magnitude of the deception. There's nothing more to say, I declared, my voice firm and without a trace of the vulnerability I had felt at the beginning. I have contacted a lawyer. He will handle everything related to the trust and the restitution of funds. Mr. Del Valle tried to protest, his voice hoarse. Camila, don't do this. We can reach an agreement. A much more generous agreement than you would get legally. His desperation was palpable. It's not a matter of generosity, Mr. Del Valle, I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. It's a matter of justice. And of principles. You cannot put a price on truth, nor on dignity. Mrs. Del Valle, her eyes still swollen, stood up with difficulty. But what about us? What will become of us? This will ruin our reputation. Our business. Her concern was purely selfish. That is a consequence of your own actions, I stated calmly. You chose the path of deception and greed. Now you must face the repercussions. The meeting room, witness to their crimes, was now the place of their judgment. Ricardo, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice low and full of resentment. So this is it, isn't it? You're going to destroy us for money. His accusation was a reflection of his own mindset. I'm not going to destroy you for money, Ricardo, I corrected. I'm going to expose you for your lies. And I'm going to reclaim what is rightfully mine. There's a big difference. My gaze was steeled. Mr. Del Valle slumped back into his chair. His gaze empty. Mrs. Del Valle sat beside him, taking his hand, both plunged into their own defeat. The image of the perfect family had crumbled, revealing a web of deceit. The $10,000 invoice, I said, picking up the paper from the table, is a testament to your greed. And the exclusion from Christmas dinner, a symbol of your contempt. But they are also the catalyst that led me to discover the truth. I felt a wave of relief, a lightness I had never experienced before. The weight of uncertainty, of feeling like a stranger in my own home, had lifted. The meeting room, which had been a place of torment, was now a sanctuary of truth. My real parents, I continued, my voice now softer, but full of emotion, left me a legacy far more valuable than money. They left me the truth, the ability to fight for it, and the strength to be who I truly am. I stood up, my back straight, my head held high. I was no longer the submissive Camila, the adopted daughter, who lived in the shadow of the Del Valles. I was Camila Robles, owner of her story and her future. This meeting is adjourned, I declared, my voice resonating with authority. My lawyer will contact you. I hope you are prepared to face the consequences of your actions. The Del Valles did not respond. They remained seated, motionless, like statues of their own misfortune. The meeting room, with its charged atmosphere, became a monument to their downfall. I turned and walked towards the door, without looking back. Every step was an affirmation of my freedom, a farewell to the life they had imposed on me. The truth had set me free, and the power of that truth was undeniable. As I left the meeting room, the air in the Del Valle mansion felt different. It was no longer oppressive, but breathed freedom. I left behind not just a room, but a life of lies, of feeling less than, of seeking approval that would never come. The truth, though painful at first, had been my greatest liberation. The legal process was long and complex, just as Mr. Del Valle had warned. Their lawyers tried everything, discrediting me, negotiating, even threatening. But I had the truth, and the truth is an impenetrable armor. My lawyer, a brilliant and ethical man, handled every detail, the evidence of the trust, the records of the Del Valles financial transactions diverting funds, and my testimony, were irrefutable. The $10,000 invoice, which they had used as a weapon, became proof of their desperation and deception. The story leaked to the press, and the scandal was enormous. The Del Valles reputation, so carefully built, crumbled. Their financial empire suffered a severe blow, and Ricardo, who had been so sure of his future, had to face the consequences of his parents' greed. I, Camila Robles, recovered my inheritance. It wasn't a magnate's fortune, but it was a considerable sum, enough to secure my independence and to invest in my own dreams. Most importantly, I reclaimed my identity, my name, my story. With the funds, I established a foundation in honor of my biological parents, Ana and Miguel Robles. A foundation dedicated to supporting small farmers in Arizona, the land of my roots. I wanted their legacy, their hard work and their love for the land, to live on through something positive. I also invested in my own graphic design career, opening my own studio. I no longer sought anyone's approval. I created out of passion. For the joy of bringing my ideas to life. My work flourished, and I found success on my own terms. That year's Christmas dinner was different. There was no ostentatious mansion, no mahogany tables, no cold stares. I spent it with friends who had become my true family, people who valued me for who I was, not for what I had or what I could give them. Sometimes, I think about that meeting room. How such a cold and formal space became the stage for my greatest revelation. It was there that the truth came to light, where the masks fell, and where I, finally, found myself. The $10,000 invoice, once a symbol of humiliation, became a reminder of my strength. Of how a situation designed to destroy me, empowered me. It taught me that true worth is not measured in money, nor in last names, but in the authenticity and resilience of the spirit. If you ever feel underestimated, or if you're charged for your existence, remember Camila's story. Sometimes, the greatest humiliation is the catalyst for your greatest liberation. Truth always finds its way, and when it does, it sets you free to be who you are truly meant to be. My life now isn't perfect, but it's authentic. It's mine. And that, to me, is worth more than any fortune.